Hey everyone, Tactics here, and welcome to my Guardian Druid guide for Dragonflight's launch patch 10.0. In this video, I'll be giving you all of the info you need to succeed at Guardian Druid, including talking through talent builds for both Rating and Mythic Plus, what stats you should focus on, the consumables and enchants you should be using, your rotation priority, and much more. If you're looking for a written version of this guide, I'm excited to announce that I'll also be maintaining the Guardian Druid guide over on the Method website, which I'll link down in the description below if you want something to read as opposed to having a video format. And of course, if there are any changes over the course of this patch, those updates will all be posted on that guide. Now, before getting into it, just a reminder that if you enjoy the content I create, find it useful, please do hit that subscribe button. Currently, only 20% of my viewers watching these videos are subscribed to the channel. It's totally free for you to do, and it really does help me out a lot. I appreciate every single one of you that supports me and the content that I make. With that said, let's talk about some of the changes Guardian Druids have seen going into Dragonflight. First off, the much loved Disco Bear Moonfire based playstyle from Legion is making a bit of a return. It joins some of the other returning favorites, such as the Mark of the Wild raid buff, the Legion artifact ability Rage of the Sleeper, and even the Night Fae Covenant ability Convoke the Spirits. One of the major complaints I had with the spec throughout Shadowlands was having too much power inside of your incarnation windows, which made the spec feel quite weak outside of those windows, and luckily that has actually been addressed in Dragonflight, with a lot of that power being moved into the baseline spec and out of that cooldown. On top of this, you can also now grab Ursoc's Guidance, which gives you Incarn CDR based on your rage spent, allowing you to move that 3-minute cooldown down consistently to like a 1.5 to 2-minute cooldown. Outside of this, a pretty large weakness of Guardian Druids in Shadowlands was their self-sustain, particularly in low target count or just single target scenarios. This has also been addressed with additions of things like Alun's Favored, allowing you to heal from your Moonfire damage, as well as our new tier bonus, which provides a hot when you use Gore procs. On top of this, you now also have access to a 0 rage cost single target DR with Tooth and Claw procced Mauls, which is now something you can actually take, and it has the added benefit of hitting very hard in single target, also giving Guardians a single target damage boost, yet another Shadowlands issue that's been addressed. We also saw some interesting new talent additions with things like Dream of Cenarius, which gives you boosted regrowth procs that are castable in bear form, as well as After the Wildfire, which causes you to radiate healing after spending 200 rage, both of which kind of reinforces this off healer niche. Overall, tuning-wise, Guardian Druid is in a very good spot right now when it comes to both damage and general tankiness, thanks to a lot of the tools and passives they gained, which is quite nice. My one major issue with the spec right now, though, is that it does really lack flexibility in its talent tree, which is kind of an unfortunate side effect of having little to no adjustments to that tree over the course of the alpha and beta. Since we're on that topic, let's talk talent trees. I'll go over my default builds for both Raid and Mythic Plus, and I'll also provide you with a variation for each. I'm only going to be talking about the end build here, so if you want to know a little bit more about pathing and the decisions I make along the way, you can check that out in my written guide on the Method website. Starting off with Raid, this is likely going to be your go-to setup. If we look at the general class tree here, there are a couple notes. First, the choice nodes for Wild Charge and Tiger Dash, as well as Ursul's Vortex and Mass Entangle aren't predetermined. This means you just kind of pick the one that best suits the boss fight that you're doing. Next, you do have a couple of floater points here that you can put in several different places. Skull Bash is accessible if you need a kick, as are Typhoon, Cyclone, Incap Roar, and Mighty Bash for CC. If you don't need any of those things, you can also pick up Verdant Heart for some external healing boosts, as well as Matted Fur for a small absorb attached to Bark Skin. Looking at the spec tree itself, like I mentioned earlier, there really isn't a ton of flexibility here, but you're able to pick up a lot of good stuff, like the Moonfire Maul and Mangle boosting talents, the Barkskin and Survival Instinct CDR from Survival of the Fittest, with an additional defensive in Rage of the Sleeper, Incarnation along with its cooldown reduction, as well as After the Wildfire for some off healing. One note for Ursoc's Guidance, this talent point is only worthwhile in a raid environment if it helps you line up Incarn for a certain mechanic you either need it for, or if it causes you to gain additional Incarns over the course of the fight. If neither of those things are true, you do not get any value from this talent point, so instead you put it somewhere else, maybe like grabbing a second charge of Survival Instincts higher up in the tree. In terms of a potential variation here, the only thing I would actually consider is if you need Earth Warden, which is very good against bosses that have slow, heavy hitting auto attacks. So as an example from Shadowlands, think Denathrius, think the Jailer. If that's the case, you can rearrange some of your mid-tier talents, dropping things like Unchecked Aggression, Vicious Cycle, and Soul of the Forest to pick up 2 points in Flashing Claws and then grab Earth Warden after that. Note that this is a decent DPS loss over the standard build I just showed, so you really only want to do this if you absolutely need Earth Warden's durability to increase against auto attacks. Next, let's look at the standard Mythic Plus build, and again, let's begin with the Druid class tree. In this case, you actually have 4 points to play around with, and a few different places you can go with them. If you ever need Mass Entangle or Ursol's Vortex for a dungeon, you can commit 2 of these points to get there through Sunfire, and outside of that, you have a bunch of 1-point options with the Wild Charge, Improved Stampeding Roar, Typhoon, Verdant Heart, or a 2nd point in Well-Honed Instincts, all on the table. Moving to the Guardian Spec tree, there's some similarities to the raid build here, the major difference being you pick up the additional rage generation from Blood Frenzy in the capstone area, and you also grab Thrashing Claws over Vicious Cycle and Unchecked Aggression. You do technically have one choice to make in this build, opting between the rage gen from Blood Frenzy as I just mentioned, or the upfront auto attack mitigation from Earth Warden. Currently, I do lean towards Blood Frenzy since this has a lot of synergy with Guardians right now. That additional rage you gain and spend feeds into both Incarn CDR from Urshok's Guidance, as well as self and party healing from After the Wildfire, but there definitely could be situations where you maybe want to move that point into Earth Warden. As for potential variations in talent build, there's really only one that I can think of that would be probably quite niche, but maybe good in dungeons that are very heavy in melee damage, while also having low party damage. Your pathing would be slightly different here, as you wouldn't go towards After the Wildfire in tier 2, so you actually gain a point in the 2nd tier, allowing you to pick up Soul of the Forest, as well as both Earth Warden and Blood Frenzy in the capstone tree. Technically, this setup is also a very small damage increase, but for the most part, you'll want to stick with that first Mythic Plus build that I showed. I did want to quickly discuss some of the unused talents as well, such as Weaving Talents, Convoke, and the bottom left of the spec tree. Weaving, unfortunately, is a bit dead, at least in this first tier, because so much of Guardian's damage right now revolves around Maul in single target, plus you have things like Incarn CDR and After the Wildfire, which are based on your rage spent, and you can't spend rage if you're not in bear form. For that reason, you avoid all of the Weaving Talents in the general tree that you aren't completely forced to path through, and this also kind of contributes to Convoke being ignored, as Incarn feeds into that rage spending, whereas Convoke gains a lot of strength if you're weaving. In terms of the bottom left of the tree, while there certainly are some good talents down there like Dream of Cenarius and Rend and Tear, the opportunity cost to actually get them is just too high right now in my opinion. Moonfire makes up a very large portion of your damage both in single target and AoE, and with 6 points in the capstone portion of the talent tree buffing Moonfire, you don't really have a lot of wiggle room. On top of this, all of your rage gen is also located on the right side of the tree, so giving that up makes you feel very rage starved, and due to pathing, you're often forced through 2 or 3 berserk nodes already, so at that point, taking Incarn is a bit of a no-brainer. This is one of the main reasons I've been hoping over the course of the beta to see a talent tree adjustment to the pathing and node locations. I'd love to get use out of some of these new talents like Dream of Cenarius, but you just need to give up way too much right now in order to get them. Unfortunately, that tree rework didn't ever happen for launch, but hopefully we do get some changes in 10.1. From there, let's talk about our brand new tier set coming in Dragonflight's first raid, which is entirely based around Gore Procs and Mangle. Our 2-piece causes Gore Proc Mangles to do 30% splash damage to nearby enemies, reduced beyond 5 targets, and also give you a 6-second buff that increases your damage done and reduces damage taken by 5%. The 4-piece increases Gore's proc chance by 5% and causes these Gore Proc Mangles to give you a pretty substantial hot over 6 seconds, in addition to the 2-piece effects. Overall, this tier is quite nice power-wise. It gives us a small DR that we can layer in with things like Tooth and Claw, while also assisting us with self-sustain in both AoE and single target situations. The bonus is definitely very simple, but according to Blizzard, that is the goal of this first tier bonus for all classes and specs in this expansion, as they really want you to focus more on the talent tree without your tier set impacting any of those choices. Unfortunately, we didn't really have any choices to begin with, but regardless, pretty decent set bonus. Now that we know what talents we're using and what our tier does, let's talk about how this impacts Guardian Druid's rotation in Dragonflight. I've got a nice little cheat sheet image here for my method written guide that details your priorities. For anywhere less than 6 targets, you want to follow this. You want to maintain your Moonfire dot at all times, followed by using your free damage boosted mauls from Tooth and Claw. Yes, even at 5 targets, using these procs is a damage boost over pressing literally anything else. That is how hard hitting Maul is right now. After this would be Galactic Guardian procs, but only if the remaining duration is 3 seconds or less. This is something I really want to emphasize because there's been a lot of misinformation spread around about how Galactic Guardian actually works. Every time it procs, it also casts a Moonfire, and with how this ability currently functions, this will also use any current Galactic Guardian proc you have before it reapplies the buff to you, meaning that previous procs aren't wasted, they're used. Because of this, you never actually want to use Galactic Guardian procs unless they're about to expire or your Moonfire is about to fall off, as you can actually save GCDs and therefore gain damage by having Galactic Guardian just use itself. That aside, past this, it's pretty standard. Prioritize maintaining your Thrash Dot, use your Incarn Cleaving Mangles if there's 4 or less targets, use regular Mauls for damage if you don't need more Iron Furs on 3 or less targets, and then you just Thrash on CD, Mangle on CD, and swipe as filler. This gets a little more simple once you start getting to 6 targets and above. You'll initially want to put out a few Moonfires while you're grouping up a pack, but in larger target counts, Moonfire does tend to be able to maintain itself because you just get so many Galactic Guardian procs due to the high number of damage instances. This means you don't actually need to fully spread your Moonfire initially in the pack, and it'll pretty quickly get to the point where it'll just maintain itself once you start thrashing. Past those two things, Tooth and Claw procs are still worthwhile from a damage perspective at 6 targets, but not above it. Otherwise, just Mangle on CD, now even in AoE thanks to our tier bonus, and fill with Swipe. A couple additional notes here based on your talent choices. First, if you're running Vicious Cycle in the raid build, you want to try and make sure you don't ever cast more than 3 Mangles or 3 Mauls in a row so you don't waste any stacks of that damage buff. For Tooth and Claw, while it is no longer worthwhile to press strictly for damage once you get above 6 targets, if you ever want priority damage or mitigation against a specific mob, then it is completely fine and potentially even the optimal decision to still use those procs in high target counts. Finally, in higher difficulty content, you may reach a point where Gore procced Mangles do move up slightly in priority due to the defensive benefits, so the 5% DR and the hot, but this won't happen until higher keystones. Now that we've talked about offense, let's talk about defense, starting with what you actually have to work with. Your major defensives to cycle between are Incarnation, Survival Instincts, Barkskin, and Rage of the Sleeper. You also have some smaller DRs that can be layered in alongside these with Scintillating Moonlight, Tooth and Claw procs, and your 2-piece Gore procs, and if talented as well, Earth Warden against melees. For self-healing, you have Frenzied Regen, Moonfire damage thanks to Elun's Favored, a Hot from your 4-piece Gore procs, and After the Wildfire from Rage Spent that also applies to up to 5 allies within 15 yards. In terms of how to layer your cooldowns, the 3 you never really want to overlap are Barkskin, Survival Instincts, and Rage of the Sleeper. Stacking these is overkill in the vast majority of situations, so spread these out and chain them if necessary to have higher overall damage reduction uptime. There are situations where you'd use these alongside Incarn, particularly both Barkskin and Rage of the Sleeper as they're both lower CDs, and especially Rage of the Sleeper if you're looking to maximize damage, as pairing this with Incarn can be quite potent, and with Ursock's Guidance you'll be able to cast one of these between each Incarn as well. Outside of these cooldowns, your primary forms of mitigation and self-healing are Iron Fur and Frenzied Regen respectively. For Iron Fur, you'll want to maintain as close to 100% uptime on at least one stack while you're actively taking physical damage. In AoE, you'll likely be spamming this to dump Rage, as our Rage generation is very high if you're spec'd into both Galactic Guardian and Blood Frenzy, especially during Incarnation. You really do want to try and make sure you don't rage cap here, as using as much rage as possible fuels both Ursock's Guidance CDR and After the Wildfire healing, so even if you don't need that extra Iron Fur stack, using the rage still has value. In single target situations, you're much less rage flooded, but again, try and maintain at least a stack of Iron Fur while you're tanking, and just dump excess rage into Mauls for that big single target damage. For Frenzied Regen uses, don't underestimate its power as a proactive heal here, especially during boss encounters where damage patterns are very predictable. Using a charge just before a large hit can allow you to quickly heal back up on your own and keep you safe for the next damage event, even if that initial hit takes you dangerously low, which can potentially allow you to save a defensive for another mechanic. That's all about Guardian abilities. Now, what about stats to aim for? First and foremost, Guardians do subscribe to the eye level over everything mantra, as the agility, armor, and stamina gained from moving up eye level will pretty much always outweigh the benefits of getting slightly better secondary stats, with the only exception here being maybe jewelry, since they lack both agility and armor. If you're comparing items of similar eye level, there are a couple different priorities you could use here, depending on if you want to focus on defense or offense. I have more in-depth information on what each stat does in my written guide, but for simplicity, if you want defense, you can go for versatility, followed by haste, then crit, and finally mastery. If you want offense, you can go for haste, followed by crit, then verse, and then mastery after that. As always though, if you want to know the exact offensive value and the best stats or gear to go with, you should sim yourself. From there, let's take a quick look at trinkets available in Season 1 and what you should look to try and pick up. Note I'll be ignoring the Mythic 0 trinkets from dungeons that are not part of this first season, though some of those may be decent to use at the beginning of the season while you're still gearing up. Starting off with raid trinkets, Decoration of Flame is a strong on-use defensive trinket that also does decent damage. Think of it like a blood spattered scale equivalent. It shoots out fire, gives you a shield, then after a few seconds the fire comes back and refreshes that shield. This is the best option if you need another defensive CD for any reason. Then we have the unique trinket drop from the raid, Whispering Incarnate Icon, which is a stat stick that gives a different stat depending on your role. For tanks, this is verse, healers get haste, and DPS get crit. The interesting thing about this trinket is that it gains a proc if someone from one of the other or both of the other roles is in your group and also using this trinket. So for Guardian, it can potentially gain both a crit and haste proc if a DPS player and a healer is in your group using this trinket as well, which can likely make this one of the stronger general trinkets available if it's buffed in this way. Then we have Controlled Current Technique, which gives you a stacking attack speed increase, which is quite powerful for Guardians, given that it can increase the number of both Tooth and Claw and Galactic Guardian procs that you get. On top of this, the trinket itself does a decent bit of damage, and it just gets even better if you have higher crit levels. So this is a pretty solid general option that has both offense and defense. Last up from raid, we have a couple pure damage options. For AoE, there's Storm Eater's Boon, a very powerful 3-minute on-use trinket that also comes with the negative effect of making you immobile for the duration. It can definitely be scary and sometimes very dangerous to use, but if you can play around this negative effect, it's one of the highest damage increasing trinkets available. For single target, there's Spiteful Storm. Not much to say here as it's just really a passive damage boost with no real defensive upside, so if you want some extra boss or priority target damage, this is a great choice. For Mythic Plus, unfortunately, trinkets are looking a bit less strong than the raid ones. You've got Granith's Enduring Scale from Noku Defensive. Excellent in terms of passive defensiveness, but the damage is very low, and not having control over this proc hurts its value a fair bit in my opinion, especially because the proc itself really isn't strong enough to justify peeling back defensive if it goes off, so the healing this has on the meters feels a bit more like pad and not so much like it's saving your life. Windscar Whetstone is something that was really popular in beta testing from Court of Stars. It's okay as a pure damage option, but do not get baited by this doing big numbers on the meters. It doesn't have great passive benefits, both offensively and defensively, because you're giving up agility main stat on the trinket in favor of mastery. So in a lot of cases, this actually isn't worth using. Similarly, Horn of Valor can be okay because Ursoc's Guidance allows Incarn to line up with this 2-minute trinket, but the trinket itself is quite under budgeted stat-wise compared to other similar eye-level trinkets, and of course, same problem, Verse instead of Agility on the trinket itself, which isn't ideal. Hunger of the Pact and Windswept Pages are both solid, though boring options, with the first being a crit stat stick and the second being a haste stat stick, though the haste is a proc as opposed to just flat stats on the trinket itself. Both solid, both fine to use. That brings us to consumables and what to buff your gear with when it comes to enchantments and gems. Do note that because of the different stat priorities for defense and offense, some of these will differ between them. The full list and links to all of these as well are in my method written guide again, so check that out if you want to see them all in one place. So just reading through these, on your chest you've got Waking Stats. Bracers have Devotion of Leech. Cloak also has Leech, either Regenerative or Writ of Leech here. Both of these give the same amount of Leech. The Regenerative one just also has some healing outside of combat, so not a big deal there. For boots, you can either get Stamina in Watcher's Loam or some speed in Plane Runner's Breeze. For your ring, you've got Devotion of Versatility or Haste, depending on your build. And on your weapon, you'll want Sophic Devotion, which is just an agility proc. There are also a couple non-enchanting related permanent enchants. Armor kits for example, are now permanent enchants on your leg armor, and you'll want to pick up Fierce Armor Kit, which gives you both stamina as well as agility and strength. And there's also tiered medallion settings from Jewel Crafter, which lets you put up to 3 sockets on a necklace, so you will definitely want to grab these whenever you get a good neck. When it comes to gems, there are 2 different types of gems here. You get 1 Primalist gem, and the rest you fill in with regular gems. For your Primalist gem, you'll want to pick up Resplendent Illimited Diamond if you're going for the Agi Verse build, or Fierce Illimited Diamond for Agi and Haste. Your other gems are either Energized Malachite for versatility and haste, or Crafty Yzmerald for haste and crit. Moving down to food, food is now kind of split between stats here, so you can get Aromatic Seafood Platter, which gives haste first, Spicy Fish Sticks for haste crit, or get your Grand Banquet, which is your feast, which is just primary stat. Files are going to differ here depending on the situation and the content you're doing. Glacial Fury is great for damage in Mythic Plus, or boss fights that have consistent ad spawns fairly often. Eye in the Storm is great for defense in Mythic Plus, or for boss fights where you're able to maintain high stacks because you're consistently tanking multiple mobs at a time. If you need damage in other cases, Elemental Chaos is your go-to, and if you want a little bit more defense in other cases, Tepid Versatility is for you. Outside of that, there's only 1 damage pot in Elemental Potion of Ultimate Power, health pots in Refreshing Healing Potion. There is a toxic version, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. And then your weapon enchant, where you'll want to grab either Primal Whetstone or Primal Weightstone, depending on if your weapon is pointy or blunt. That wraps up this video, guys. Hopefully it helps you understand Guardian Druids in Dragonflight a bit more and how to play them. If you enjoyed this video, please do be sure to hit that subscribe button. I've got a ton of content coming out over the course of Dragonflight, including Mythic Plus advanced guides, dungeon walkthroughs from a tank's perspective, raid guides, and much, much more. So hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss out on a single video. If you have any questions at all, feel free to drop those in the comments down below and I'll do my best to answer. You can also stop by my Twitch channel at Tactics, where I stream both high keys and mythic rating from a tank perspective, and I'll also have the Ichabod and Feldrake Twitch drops once Dragonflight launches, so you can earn some cool cosmetics in the process. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.